The silence in courtroom 304 wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and terrifying. Caleb Sterling stood in his $3,000 suit, pointing a shaking finger at the woman he had promised to love forever. He didn't just want a divorce. He wanted to destroy her. He called her lazy. He called her a financial leech. He laughed as he told the judge she was nothing without him. But Caleb made one fatal mistake. He forgot who she was before she took his name. When the judge finally opened the sealed envelope on his desk, the color drained from his face. He looked at the trembling wife, then back at the arrogant husband, and whispered 3 words that changed everything. "You think you know how this ends? You have no idea." The rain battered against the tall, reinforced glass windows of the Seattle King County Superior Court. It was a gray, miserable Tuesday in November, the kind of day that soaked into your bones and made you feel as though the sun would never shine again. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was even colder. Caleb Sterling checked his reflection in the dark screen of his phone. He looked perfect. His charcoal gray suit was tailored to within a millimeter of his life. His tie was a deep, power red silk, and his hair was gelled back with the precision of a man who controlled every aspect of his existence. He was the CEO of Nebula Logistics, a company that had seen a 400% growth in the last fiscal quarter. He was the golden boy of the Pacific Northwest tech scene, a man featured in Forbes under the 30 Under 30 list just 5 years ago. Now at 35, he was tired of the dead weight dragging him down. He glanced to his left. Sitting at the defendant's table was Grace. Grace Sterling looked nothing like the wife of a multimillionaire. She wore a beige cardigan that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back in a messy, loose bun, held together by a cheap plastic clip, and she was staring at her hands. She looked small, defeated. "Stop slouching," Caleb hissed, leaning over the aisle that separated their tables before the session began. "You look pathetic. At least try to have some dignity while I take everything." Grace didn't look up. She just smoothed the wrinkles on her skirt. "I'm just waiting, Caleb," she whispered, her voice raspy, as if she hadn't spoken in days. "Waiting for what? A miracle," Caleb scoffed, turning back to his lawyer. Caleb's lawyer was Richard Banks, the kind of attorney who cost more per hour than most people made in a month. Banks was a shark in a human suit, known for tearing apart spouses in divorce settlements until they were left with nothing but debt and emotional trauma. "Don't worry about her, Caleb," Banks said, organizing a stack of files thick enough to serve as a doorstop. "We have the prenup. We have the character witnesses. We have the financial records showing she hasn't contributed a dime to the household in 6 years. This is a slam dunk. We'll have you single and liquid by lunch." Caleb smirked. "I just want her out of the house, Richard. She depresses me. It's like living with a ghost. A broke, uneducated ghost." On the other side of the aisle, Grace sat alone. She didn't have a lawyer. When she had filed the paperwork, stating she would be representing herself, Caleb had laughed for 10 minutes straight. He had told all his friends at the country club about it. "My wife, who failed community college, is going to go up against Richard Banks. Bring popcorn." The bailiff's voice cut through the murmuring in the room. "All rise. The Honorable Judge Arthur Harrison, presiding." The door behind the bench opened, and Judge Harrison walked in. He was a man in his 60s, with a reputation that made grown lawyers sweat. He was known as the Hammer because he had zero tolerance for theatrics lies or waste of time. He adjusted his spectacles, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk, looking for a field mouse. He sat down, the heavy wood of the chair creaking in the silence. "Be seated," Harrison grunted. He opened the file in front of him. Case number 49202 Sterling versus Sterling. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I see we have a contest regarding asset distribution and spousal support. Yes, Your Honor. Banks stood up, buttoning his jacket smoothly. My client, Mr. Sterling, is petitioning for a total severance of assets based on the prenuptial agreement signed 7 years ago. Furthermore, we are denying the request for alimony on the grounds of, well, frankly, Your Honor, parasitic behavior. Judge Harrison peered over his glasses. Parasitic behavior. That is a colorful legal term, Mr. Banks. Accurate, however. Banks smiled oilily. The judge turned his gaze to Grace. She stood up slowly. She looked terrified. Her hands were shaking. And you are representing yourself, Mrs. Sterling? The judge asked, his voice softening slightly, perhaps out of pity. Yes, Your Honor, Grace said. Her voice was quiet, barely audible. Speak up, Mrs. Sterling, Harrison commanded, though not unkindly. The court reporter needs to hear you. Yes, I am representing myself, she repeated louder this time. Caleb let out a loud, audible sigh of annoyance. Banks nudged him to be quiet, but the smirk remained on Caleb's face. This was going to be a slaughter. Very well, Judge Harrison said. Mr. Banks, you may proceed with your opening statement and call your client. Banks moved to the center of the floor, commanding the room. He painted a picture of Caleb Sterling as a titan of industry, a man who worked 18-hour days to build an empire from nothing. He described Nebula Logistics as the backbone of the local economy. And then, Banks gestured to Grace with a look of disdain. We have Mrs. Sterling, a woman who for the last 6 years has not held a job, a woman who spends her days at home while my client toils, a woman who, despite having every opportunity provided by my client's success, has chosen a life of lethargy. He called Caleb to the stand. Caleb walked up, placing his hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. He sat down, crossing his legs, looking confident. Mr. Sterling, Banks began, tell the court about the nature of your marriage. It started well, Caleb lied smoothly. But as my business grew, Grace, she just stopped trying. I tried to encourage her. I offered to pay for university. I offered to set her up with a small business. She refused everything. She just wanted to sit in the house I bought, eating the food I paid for, wearing the clothes I purchased. Did she contribute to the household chores, domestic duties? Caleb laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. Hardly. We have a housekeeper, Maria. Grace mostly stays in the library or the garden. I honestly don't know what she does all day. She certainly doesn't help me. And why are you seeking to enforce the prenup strictly? Because... Caleb leaned into the microphone, locking eyes with Grace. I built this. Me. Alone. She was a waitress when I met her. I pulled her out of a diner and gave her a life of luxury. Now that we are incompatible, I don't see why I should have to pay her millions of dollars just because she managed to stay married to me for 7 years. She brings nothing to the table. She is, for lack of a better word, a liability. The courtroom was silent. The cruelty was palpable. Even the court stenographer looked up, frowning at Caleb. Your Honor, Caleb continued, addressing the judge directly, now breaking protocol. She is asking for half of Nebula Logistics. Half. She doesn't even know how to balance a checkbook. If you give her shares in my company, she will ruin it. She isn't intelligent enough to handle that kind of power. It would be negligent to hand over a multi-million-dollar portfolio to a woman whose biggest accomplishment is making a pot of coffee. Judge Harrison's face remained stone. Are you finished, Mr. Sterling? I am, Caleb said, feeling triumphant. Mrs. Sterling. The judge turned to Grace. Do you have any questions for the witness? This is your chance for cross-examination. Grace stood up. She picked up a single piece of paper from her table. She walked slowly toward the witness stand. Caleb looked at her with amusement. What was she going to ask? Why he stopped loving her? It would be pathetic. Grace stopped 3 feet from him. She didn't look sad anymore. She looked, focused. Caleb, she said, her voice steady, you stated that I have not worked in 6 years. Is that correct? That is correct, Caleb smirked. And you stated that you built Nebula Logistics entirely by yourself, using your own capital and your own intellectual property. I did. Every dime, every code, every contract. And you stated, Grace looked down at the paper, that I am not intelligent enough to understand your business. Honey, Caleb chuckled, you still count on your fingers. Let's be real. Grace nodded slowly. She turned to the judge. No further questions for the witness at this time, Your Honor, but I would like to submit Evidence Exhibit A. Banks jumped up. Objection. We haven't seen any exhibits. She didn't file a discovery list. I filed it this morning, Mr. Banks, Grace said, calmly cutting him off. It was a sealed submission approved by the clerk due to the sensitive nature of the corporate trade secrets involved. Banks paused. Trade secrets. What trade secrets could a housewife have? Judge Harrison waved his hand. I have the sealed envelope right here. I was wondering when we would get to this. The judge picked up a thick manila envelope that had been sitting on the corner of his desk. It was stamped with red ink, confidential, eyes only. Caleb rolled his eyes. Probably her diary or some love letters. This is a waste of time. Judge Harrison ripped the seal open. He pulled out a stack of documents. The room went quiet as the judge began to read. First he looked bored, then his brow furrowed. He flipped a page. He adjusted his glasses. He leaned closer to the paper. He stopped. The judge looked up. He looked at Caleb. Then he looked at Grace. The expression on Judge Harrison's face transformed from boredom to absolute, unadulterated shock. He looked back at the document, tracing a signature at the bottom of the page. Mr. Sterling. The judge's voice was different now. It was lower, more dangerous. You are under oath, is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. Caleb frowned, sensing a shift in the air. And you claim you are the sole founder and owner of the intellectual property known as the Nebula algorithm, which powers your logistics firm. I am, Caleb said, though his voice wavered slightly. Then, Judge Harrison held up the document, his hand shaking slightly with suppressed anger. Can you explain why the patent for that algorithm dated 2 years before your company was founded is registered to a holding company called S.J. Vanguard? Caleb laughed nervously. That's just a shell company. I use it for tax purposes. Is it? The judge turned to Grace. Mrs. Sterling. Who owns S.J. Vanguard? Grace looked at her husband. For the first time, a small, cold smile touched her lips. I do, Your Honor, she said. Caleb froze. That's a lie. She's lying. She doesn't own anything. Mr. Banks, the judge barked. Sit your client down, now. Judge Harrison turned his full attention to Grace. Mrs. Sterling, if these documents are authentic, they imply that... The judge paused, trying to wrap his head around the magnitude of it. They imply that Nebula Logistics is operating on a license granted by you, a license that is revocable. Yes, Your Honor, Grace said. And if you turn to page 4, you will see the infidelity and moral turpitude clause in the licensing agreement. Caleb's face went white. He knew that clause. He had signed the licensing agreement years ago without reading it, thinking it was just paperwork his lawyer at the time had handled. He thought S.J. Vanguard was some faceless offshore entity his old partner had set up. The clause states, the judge read aloud, that should the acting CEO of the operating entity bring public disrepute or act in bad faith against the licensor, the license to use the algorithm is immediately terminated, and all assets generated by said algorithm revert to the licensor. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the rain hitting the glass like bullets. Mr. Sterling. The judge looked at Caleb with a mixture of pity and disgust. You just spent an hour humiliating the licensor of your entire business. You just called the owner of your fortune a leech in open court. Caleb stood up, panicking. No, that's impossible. She's a waitress. She's Grace. Sit down. The judge slammed his gavel. I want to call a witness, Grace said softly. I want to call Mr. Marcus Vane. The doors to the back of the courtroom opened. A man walked in. He was older, distinguished, wearing a suit that cost more than Caleb's car. Everyone in the legal world knew Marcus Vane. He was the most feared corporate attorney in Chicago, perhaps in the country. He usually handled mergers for Fortune 500 companies, not divorces. But he wasn't walking to the defendant's table to represent Grace. He walked to the witness stand. Mr. Vane. Grace nodded to him. Mrs. Sterling. Vane bowed his head respectfully to her. Not to the judge. To Grace. Caleb felt the room spinning. Why was Marcus Vane bowing to his wife Banks? Caleb's lawyer looked like he was about to be sick. He recognized Vane. He whispered frantically to Caleb, "Shut up! Do not say a word. That is Marcus Vane. If he is here, we are in serious trouble." Judge Harrison gestured for Vane to be sworn in. Mr. Vane? Grace asked, standing confidently in the middle of the room now. The slouch was gone. The meek housewife demeanor had evaporated, replaced by a posture of steel. Please state your relationship to me. I am the personal attorney and estate manager for the Prentice Family Trust, Vane said, his voice booming. Prentice. Caleb blinked. Grace's maiden name was Prentice, but Prentice was a common name. There were thousands of Prentices. And, Vane continued, looking directly at Caleb with eyes like flint, I have served as the proxy director for Mrs. Sterling's business interests for the last decade to protect her privacy. Can you explain to the court, Grace asked, who my father was? Your father was Elias Prentice, Vane stated. A gasp went through the courtroom. Even the judge's eyes widened. Elias Prentice wasn't just a rich man. He was an inventor, a recluse, and a genius who had patented key technologies used in everything from satellite navigation to shipping logistics in the late 90s. He had died 7 years ago, leaving his fortune to charity. Or so everyone thought. And what did my father leave me? He left you everything, Vane said, including the patent portfolio known as the Foundation Series. He also left you a specific instruction to find a partner who loved you for you, not for the name or the money. That is why you adopted the persona of a woman of modest means. Caleb gripped the table. His knuckles were white. This is a joke, he whispered. She worked at a diner. I saw her W-2s. Fake, Vane said, cutting him off from the stand. Fabricated employment records created by my firm to maintain Mrs. Sterling's cover. She wanted to be sure, Mr. Sterling. She wanted to be sure you were the man you said you were. Grace turned to Caleb. Her eyes were sad but dry. I fell in love with you, Caleb. You were ambitious. You were hungry. I wanted to help you. So I had my trust set up a blind angel investment for your startup. I funneled the money to you. I gave you the license to my father's algorithm. I made you. I built you. You, Caleb choked. You gave me the money. All of it, Grace said. Every time you got a lucky break or a new investor, that was me, signing checks from the kitchen table while you were out cheating on me. Banks, realizing the ship was sinking, stood up. Your Honor, this is entrapment deception. It's corporate law, Mr. Banks, Judge Harrison snapped. And it appears your client has been swimming in a pool he doesn't own. Grace walked back to her table and picked up another document. Caleb, she said, I was willing to let you have the company. I was willing to walk away with just my trust fund and let you keep the ego boost of being a CEO. I didn't care about the credit. I just wanted a clean break. She held up the transcript of his opening testimony. But then, her voice hardened. You stood there and told the world I was stupid. You called me a leech. You tried to humiliate me to validate your own insecurity. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, pursuant to the terms of the contract my husband signed with S.J. Vanguard, his public disparagement of the licensor me triggers the bad faith clause. I am hereby revoking the license for Nebula Logistics to use the Prentice algorithms. Effective immediately. If you do that, Banks shouted, the company collapses. The stock will be worthless by tomorrow morning. I know, Grace said coldly. I don't need the money. But it seems Caleb does. Caleb stood up, his face red with rage. You can't, Nahant. You can't do this. I am the CEO. I am the face of the company. You are a manager, Grace corrected him. And you're fired. The judge sat back, stunned. He had seen messy divorces, but he had never seen a total demolition like this. We need a recess, Banks screamed. Your Honor, we need a recess to review these documents. Recess granted, Judge Harrison said, banging the gavel. 30 minutes, but Mr. Sterling, I suggest you use this time to beg. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 304 swung shut behind them, muffling the sound of the gallery's excited whispering. The hallway of the King County Superior Court was a cavernous expanse of marble and echoing footsteps, usually a place where lawyers made deals and clients wept. Today, it was a war zone. Richard Banks didn't just walk out of the courtroom. He stormed out, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking furiously against the stone floor. He grabbed Caleb by the arm hard and dragged him into a small, semi-private alcove near the water fountains. Are you insane? Banks hissed, his face a mask of red fury. He wasn't the smooth, confident shark anymore. He was a man watching his reputation disintegrate. You told me she was a nobody. You told me she was a high school dropout who watched soap operas all day. Caleb pulled his arm away, adjusting his suit jacket with trembling hands. She was... I don't know what this is, Richard. It's some kind of trick. It has to be fraud. Grace doesn't have the brain for business. She asks me how to reset the router. It's not fraud, you idiot. Banks slammed his hand against the wall, making a passing clerk jump. That was Marcus Vane. Marcus Vane doesn't involve himself in fraud. He represents the Prentice estate. Do you have any idea how big that estate is? Elias Prentice practically invented the modern supply chain algorithm. If your wife is his daughter, you haven't just been divorcing a housewife. You've been trying to rob the bank that owns you. Caleb leaned against the cold wall, his breathing shallow. He felt like he was waking up from a dream into a nightmare. So fix it, he snapped, trying to regain his usual arrogance. You're the best lawyer in Seattle. Find a loophole. The prenup says what's mine is mine. The prenup is toilet paper, Banks spat. The assets you're fighting for the company, the house, the accounts, they were built on a license she granted you, a revocable license. If she pulls the algorithm, Nebula. Logistics is just a warehouse full of empty trucks and confused drivers. You don't own the engine, Caleb. You just own the paint job. Across the hallway, the atmosphere was entirely different. Grace stood near the large windows, watching the rain streak the glass. She looked calm, almost serene. Marcus Vane stood beside her like a silent sentinel, checking messages on his phone. Caleb looked at her. Really looked at her. For the last 3 years he had looked through her. She was just furniture to him, a reminder of his humbler beginnings that he wanted to erase. But now, seeing her standing there, he saw something else. The posture was different. The way she held her head wasn't submissive. It was regal. He pushed past Banks and walked toward her. Grace, Caleb said. His voice echoed in the hall. Marcus Vane stepped forward to intercept, but Grace raised a hand. It's okay, Marcus. Caleb stopped 3 feet away. He put on his best smile, the smile that had charmed investors, the smile that had won him awards. Honey, look, things got heated in there. Lawyers, right? They make us say things we don't mean. Grace turned to face him. Her eyes were dry. You meant every word, Caleb. You've been saying them to me for years. You're useless. You're lazy. You're lucky to have me. I was stressed, Caleb pleaded, stepping closer, lowering his voice to a seductive whisper. Running a company is hard. You know that. I took it out on you and I'm sorry. But let's not burn everything down just to prove a point. We're a team. Remember, you and me against the world. Grace let out a short, dry laugh. We were never a team, Caleb. I was your ladder. And now that you think you've reached the top, you decided to kick the ladder away. You just forgot that the ladder was the only thing holding you up. I can change, Caleb said, desperation creeping into his tone. We can drop the divorce. We can go on a trip. Paris. You always wanted to go to Paris. I'll book the jet. The jet. Grace raised an eyebrow. The Gulfstream G650. The one registered to Skyline Holdings. Yes, we'll take it this afternoon. Caleb, Grace said softly, almost pitying him. Skyline Holdings is a subsidiary of S.J. Vanguard. I repossessed the jet 10 minutes ago. Pilot's orders are to fly it to Teterboro and impound it. Caleb's mouth fell open. You took my plane, she corrected. And I cancelled your company credit cards, froze the corporate expense accounts, and notified the SEC of a material change in Nebula's operational capacity. You're destroying me. Caleb screamed, his facade breaking. People in the hallway stopped to stare. I am Caleb Sterling. I am a visionary. You are a fraud. Grace said, her voice like ice. You didn't write the code. You didn't design the logistics network. My father did. You were just the handsome face I put in front of the camera, because I didn't want the fame. I wanted a husband. I wanted a family. But you were too busy sleeping with your VP of marketing to give me that." Caleb froze. The blood drained from his face. "Oh." Grace smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You didn't think I knew about Veronica." Downstairs in the grand marble atrium of the courthouse, Veronica Hale sat on a plush leather bench, scrolling through Instagram. Veronica was stunning. She was 26, blonde, and possessed the kind of sharp manufactured beauty that required hours of maintenance and thousands of dollars a month. She was currently the vice president of marketing at Nebula Logistics, a title Caleb had created for her 3 months after they started sleeping together. She checked her watch. It was a gold Cartier Panthère, a gift from Caleb for their 6-month anniversary. "Taking forever," she muttered, tapping her manicured nails on her phone screen. She was waiting for the all-clear text. Caleb had promised that by noon, the dead weight would be cut loose and they could go to lunch at Canlis to celebrate their freedom. They were planning to announce their engagement next month, once the ink on the divorce was dry. Veronica had already picked out the ring, a 5-carat oval diamond. Her phone buzzed. It wasn't a text from Caleb. It was a notification from the Bloomberg app. Breaking news: Nebula Logistics stock plummets 40%. In afternoon trading amidst licensing scandal. Veronica frowned. She tapped the notification. Shares of Seattle tech darling Nebula Logistics are in free fall this afternoon, following rumors that the company has lost the rights to its core operating algorithm. Sources close to the company suggest that the intellectual property was never owned by CEO Caleb Sterling, but rather licensed from a trust controlled by... Veronica squinted at the screen. The text was small, controlled by the Prentice estate currently managed by his estranged wife, Grace Sterling. Veronica felt a cold knot form in her stomach. That couldn't be right. Grace was a frump. Caleb called her the maid. He said she barely graduated high school. Suddenly her phone started blowing up. Emails from the office. From HR department. Subject: immediate. Freeze on all accounts from payroll subject: notice of suspension. Veronica stood up, her heels clacking on the floor. She tried to call Caleb. It went straight to voicemail. "What is going on?" she hissed. She saw the elevator doors open. A group of reporters who had been camping out for a different trial suddenly perked up. They weren't looking at her. They were looking at the staircase. Caleb was descending the stairs. He looked disheveled. His tie was crooked. He was sweating. Beside him, Richard Banks looked like he wanted to be invisible. "Caleb!" Veronica shouted, waving her hand. She pushed through the crowd of reporters. "Caleb, baby." Caleb looked up. When he saw Veronica, he didn't look happy. He looked terrified. "Not now, Veronica," he muttered, trying to push past her. "What do you mean, not now?" She grabbed his lapel. "My company card just got declined for my latte. And have you seen the stock price? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Caleb snapped, pushing her hand away. She tricked us." "Who?" "Grace, the wife." Veronica laughed incredulously. "The one you said owned sweatpants and how could she trick you?" Before Caleb could answer, the double doors at the top of the stairs opened again. Grace Sterling walked out. She had taken off the beige cardigan. Underneath, she wore a simple black dress that looked modest, but to a trained eye like Veronica's was clearly vintage Chanel. She walked with a grace that screamed old money. Marcus Vane walked beside her carrying her bag. The reporters, sensing the real story, turned their cameras toward Grace. "Mrs. Sterling," a reporter from Channel 5 shouted, "is it true you are the majority shareholder of the entity that controls Nebula?" Grace stopped on the landing. She looked down at Caleb and Veronica. It was a tableau of total defeat. The cheating husband and the ambitious mistress squabbling in the lobby, while the empire burned. "I am," Grace said, her voice clear and carrying over the crowd. "Mrs. Sterling," another reporter yelled. "What do you have to say to your husband's claims that he built the company from nothing?" Grace looked directly at Caleb. "I think my husband is confused. He didn't build a company. He managed a lemonade stand that I paid for, and he just forgot to pay the supplier." Veronica looked at Caleb. She looked at the sweating, panicked man in the suit that suddenly looked too big for him. Then she looked at Grace, the woman holding all the cards. The calculation in Veronica's head took less than a second. "You lied to me," Veronica said loudly, stepping away from Caleb. "Veronica, wait!" Caleb reached for her. "Don't touch me," she shrieked, playing to the cameras. "You told me you were a genius. You told me you owned everything. You're nothing but a fraud. Veronica, please, we can fix this." "Fix what?" she sneered. "I'm not hitching my wagon to a bankrupt loser. I quit." She turned on her heel and marched toward the exit, leaving Caleb standing alone in the circle of flashing cameras. Grace watched the scene with a blank expression. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just turned to Marcus Vane. "Shall we go, Marcus? I have a board meeting to attend." The headquarters of Nebula Logistics was a glass tower in downtown Seattle. The boardroom on the 40th floor offered a panoramic view of the Puget Sound, a view that usually made the board members feel like gods. Today the mood was apocalyptic. There were 7 board members sitting around the long mahogany table. They were shouting over each other on phones with frantic investors, checking tablets that showed the stock price diving into the red. "We've lost 300 million in market cap in 2 hours, shouted eager-to-please board member Greg Sullivan, who is contacting Caleb. "Where is he?" "Caleb is unreachable," said the chairman, a stern man named Arthur Doyle. "And frankly, based on the legal briefs I've just received from the Prentice estate, Caleb is the least of our problems." The double doors swung open. Everyone turned, expecting Caleb to burst in with an explanation. Instead, Grace Sterling walked in. The room went silent. Most of these men had met Grace at company Christmas parties. They remembered her as the quiet wife who handed out coats or stood in the corner drinking sparkling water. They had dismissed her as a trophy wife, who wasn't even particularly trophy-like. She walked to the head of the table, Caleb's seat. "Gentlemen," she said calmly, "and Ms. Davies." She nodded to the sole female board member. "Mrs. Sterling." Arthur Doyle stood up, confused. "This is a closed session for the board of directors. You can't be here." "Actually, Arthur," Grace said, placing a leather portfolio on the table. "I can." She remained standing. "As you know, Nebula operates under a Series B licensing agreement with SJ Vanguard. That agreement has a change of control provision." "There hasn't been a change of control," Greg Sullivan argued. "Caleb is still CEO." "Caleb is in breach of contract," Grace corrected, "which triggers a default. In the event of a default, SJ Vanguard has the right to convert its outstanding royalties into equity." She opened the portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper down the long table. It spun perfectly, stopping right in front of Arthur Doyle. "I executed the conversion 10 minutes ago," Grace said. "I now own 51% of the voting shares of Nebula Logistics." Doyle picked up the paper. His hands shook as he read the legal jargon. He looked up pale. It's ironclad." So, Grace said, finally sitting down in Caleb's chair. It was comfortable. I am not here as the aggrieved wife. I am here as the majority shareholder. What do you want? Doyle asked, sinking back into his seat. First, Grace said, I want Caleb Sterling removed as CEO effective immediately for cause. The cause being gross negligence, public defamation of the majority shareholder, and, she paused, pulling out another file, embezzlement. The room gasped. Embezzlement? Ms. Davies asked. Corporate expenses, Grace said. Caleb has been using company funds to pay for a condo in Belltown, a condo occupied by one Veronica Hale. He also used company funds to purchase jewelry, lease a Porsche, and fund vacations that were classified as business development trips to Cabo. She tossed the stack of credit card statements onto the table. This is fraud, Grace said, and I will not have a criminal running my father's legacy. Motion to remove Caleb Sterling as CEO, Doyle said immediately. Do I have a second? Second, said Sullivan, raising his hand faster than anyone. All in favor. Every hand went up. Motion carried, Doyle said. He's out. Good, Grace said. Second order of business. We need to stabilize the stock. You will issue a press release stating that the dispute regarding the license was a misunderstanding caused by previous management, and that the Prentice estate has reaffirmed its commitment to Nebula Logistics under new leadership. And who is the new leadership? Doyle asked. Grace looked around the table. Miss Hall, until we find a suitable replacement, I will be stepping in as interim CEO. You... Sullivan scoffed, old habits dying hard. Grace, with all due respect, you don't have the appearance. You've been a housewife. Grace looked at Sullivan. Her gaze was withering. Greg, she said, who do you think fixed the supply chain bottleneck in the Hamburg port last year? Greg blinked. Caleb said he did that. He said he stayed up all night rewriting the routing code. Caleb doesn't know Java from JavaScript, Grace said. I wrote the patch. I did it from my laptop in bed while Caleb was snoring. Who do you think negotiated the tariff reduction with the trade minister in Vietnam? Caleb went to Vietnam. Caleb went to Vietnam and got food poisoning, Grace corrected. I did the video calls. I drafted the proposal. I have been running this company from the shadows for 5 years because I wanted my husband to feel important. I am done hiding. She leaned forward. Do you have any other questions about my qualifications, Greg? Greg swallowed hard. No, ma'am. Suddenly there was a commotion outside the glass walls of the conference room. Caleb had arrived. He was banging on the glass doors. His keycard wasn't working. He was shouting, his face red and distorted. He looked like a madman. Grace didn't even turn her head. She just pressed the intercom button on the table. Security, she said calmly. Yes, Mrs. Sterling, the voice of the head of security crackled back. There is a trespasser on the 40th floor, a Mr. Caleb Sterling. He no longer has clearance. Please escort him from the building. Understood. The board members watched in silence as 2 large security guards approached Caleb. He tried to fight them. He pointed at the boardroom, screaming something about his wife, about his rights. The guards grabbed him by the arms. Caleb locked eyes with Grace through the glass. He looked begging, pleading. Grace looked at him. She raised her hand and gave a small, distinct wave. Goodbye. The guards dragged him away toward the elevators. Now, Grace said, turning back to the stunned board members. Let's talk about Q4 projections. I have some ideas about expanding into the biomed sector. 3 weeks later. The Sunset Inn on the outskirts of SeaTac Airport was the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be found. The neon sign out front, flickered with a buzzing, dying hum, illuminating the rain-slicked pavement in a sickly orange glow. Inside room 112, Caleb Sterling sat on the edge of a mattress that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. He was unrecognizable. The $3,000 suits were gone, replaced by a wrinkled hoodie and jeans he had bought at a discount store. His perfectly styled hair was greasy and unkempt, and a patchy beard covered his jawline. He hadn't slept in 48 hours. On the cheap laminate table in front of him lay 3 things: his passport, a bottle of cheap whiskey, and his laptop. Caleb took a swig of the whiskey, wincing as it burned his throat. It wasn't the single malt scotch he was used to, but it numbed the panic that had been clawing at his chest since the board meeting. "It doesn't matter," he muttered to himself, his voice cracking. "None of it matters. I'm Caleb Sterling. I always win." He had a plan, a final desperate gambit. While Grace had frozen his domestic assets, the company accounts and the credit cards, she couldn't touch what she didn't know about. Over the last 5 years, Caleb had been methodical. Every time he closed a big deal, he had skimmed a percentage off the top consulting fees paid to shell companies' inflated vendor invoices kickbacks. He had funneled it all into a numbered account in the Cayman Islands, the sovereign vault. It was his golden parachute. There was nearly $5.5 million sitting in that account, enough to get him to Brazil, enough to start over. He would buy a villa on the coast, change his name, and live like a king while Grace rotted in the rain in Seattle. He had already booked the flight, a one-way ticket to Sao Paulo, leaving in 3 hours. He just needed to transfer the funds to a crypto wallet to make them untraceable. He opened his laptop. The screen cast a blue light on his hollow face. He navigated to the bank's secure portal. "Welcome user 884920. Please enter your password." His fingers flew across the keys. K1NGENM4K 2024. The screen loaded. A spinning wheel. Caleb held his breath. Access granted. He let out a jagged, hysterical laugh. "Yes, you missed one, Grace, you missed one." He clicked on the account balance tab, ready to see the numbers that would save his life. The page refreshed. Account balance, $0 to dollars. Caleb stared. He blinked, thinking the Wi-Fi had glitched. He hit refresh. Account balance, $0. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He clicked on Transaction History. There was only one recent transaction dated 2 days ago. Outbound transfer, $450,000. Recipient Nebula Logistics, Restitution Fund, authorized by Primary Trustee. Caleb felt like he had been punched in the gut. He couldn't breathe. Primary Trustee. There was no trustee. He had opened this account himself. He had flown to the Caymans personally to sign the papers. He fumbled for his phone, dialing the bank's emergency concierge line. His hands were shaking so badly, he dropped the phone twice before connecting. "Sovereign Vault Secure Line," a smooth British voice answered. "Where is my money?" Caleb screamed. "I'm looking at my account and it's empty." "Who authorized this? May I have your account number, sir?" 884920, Caleb Sterling. "One moment, Mr. Sterling. Ah, yes, I see the transaction here. The funds were repatriated on Tuesday." "Repatriated? That's theft. I didn't authorize that." "No, sir," the banker replied calmly. "But the account co-signatory did." "There is no co-signatory," Caleb yelled, standing up and kicking the chair over. "I am the sole owner. Actually, sir, if you check your original incorporation documents for the shell company, Blue Horizon Enterprises, which holds this account, you will see that the entity was set up as a subsidiary of S.J. Vanguard." Caleb froze. The room spun. "That's impossible," he whispered. "I set up Blue Horizon. My lawyer handled it." "Your lawyer at the time was Mr. Marcus Vane, was he not?" The phone slipped from Caleb's hand and hit the dirty carpet. Marcus Vane. Grace hadn't just been watching him for the last few months. She had been watching him from the very beginning, when he thought he was being clever, hiding money, setting up secret accounts. He was using lawyers she recommended. He was using structures she controlled. He wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a rat in a maze, and Grace had built the walls. He sank to his knees. The flight to Brazil. He couldn't go. He had no money for the taxi to the airport, let alone to survive in a foreign country. Then he heard it. The sound of sirens. Not in the distance. Close. Blue and red lights flashed through the thin curtains painting the motel room in a chaotic strobe effect. Caleb scrambled to the window and peered through the slit in the drapes. 3 police cruisers were blocking the exit to the motel parking lot. Officers were stepping out, guns drawn. But it wasn't just local police. There were men in windbreakers with FBI printed on the back. And standing near the lead car, looking miserable under a large black umbrella, was Richard Banks. Caleb bolted for the back door of the room. He threw it open and stopped dead. 2 officers were waiting right there. "Caleb Sterling," one of them asked, hand resting on his holster. Caleb backed up, retreating into the room. The officers followed him in. The front door burst open a second later. "Hands where I can see them." Caleb raised his hands. "This is a mistake, my wife. She's setting me up. You have to listen to me." An older detective walked in. Detective Miller. He looked tired. "Caleb Sterling, you are under arrest." "For what?" Caleb cried as they shoved him against the wall. "A bad divorce, is that a crime now?" "We have a federal warrant," Miller said, pulling a folded paper from his jacket. "Wire fraud, money laundering, embezzlement of corporate funds, and thanks to your little performance in court last month, 3 counts of perjury." They cuffed him. The metal bit into his wrists, cold and final. "My lawyer," Caleb shouted as they dragged him out into the rain. "I want Richard Banks. He's right there." They hauled him out to the parking lot. The rain was torrential now, soaking through his hoodie in seconds. Caleb saw Banks standing by the police line. "Richard!" Caleb screamed, fighting against the grip of the officers. "Richard, tell them it was a misunderstanding, Satanasu." Richard Banks looked at Caleb. He didn't step forward. He just shook his head slowly. "I can't represent you, Caleb," Banks shouted over the rain. "I'm a witness for the prosecution now. It was the only way to keep my license." "You traitor!" Caleb shrieked. "I paid you. You paid me with stolen money," Banks yelled back, turning away in disgust. The officers shoved Caleb toward the back of a squad car. A crowd of motel guests had gathered on the balconies, filming the scene with their phones. Caleb Sterling, the man who had been on the cover of magazines, was now entertainment for strangers in a cheap motel parking lot. As the officer pushed his head down to put him in the car, Caleb saw it. Parked just beyond the police barricade in the shadows of the streetlights was a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom. The engine was running the headlights, cutting through the mist. The back window rolled down slowly. Caleb froze half in and half out of the police car. Grace sat inside. She looked immaculate. She was wearing a cream-colored coat, her hair perfectly styled, a stark contrast to the wet, broken man being arrested. She held a flute of champagne in one hand. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't frowning. She looked at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a bug under a microscope. Their eyes locked. "Grace!" Caleb roared, desperation taking over. "Grace, please help me. I'm your husband. I love you." Grace took a sip of her champagne. She leaned slightly toward the window. "You never loved me." "Caleb," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden silence of the moment, it carried perfectly. "You loved the reflection of yourself you saw in my eyes, but the mirror broke. Grace, don't do this. I'll sign anything. I'll give you everything." "You have nothing to give," she replied calmly. "I already took it all." She pressed a button on the door panel. "Grace," the window rolled up, sealing her away from him. "Get in," the officer grunted, shoving Caleb the rest of the way into the cramped back seat. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. From behind the wire mesh, Caleb watched as the Rolls-Royce pulled away, gliding smoothly over the wet asphalt, disappearing into the dark, rainy night of Seattle. He looked down at his hands, cuffed in his lap. He thought about the courtroom. He thought about the way he had pointed his finger at her. "She's a nobody," he had said. "She's nothing." Caleb leaned his head against the cold window and closed his eyes. The realization washed over him colder than the rain. He had played a game of chess against a grandmaster, and he hadn't even realized the game had started until she called checkmate. Oh my God, I am literally shaking. Grace didn't just win. She completely dismantled his entire existence. That moment when Caleb realized the bank account was set up by her lawyers the whole time. That is the definition of playing the long game. It really proves that you should never mistake silence for weakness. Caleb thought he was the hunter, but he was the prey from day one. What do you guys think? Was Grace's revenge too extreme? Or was it the perfect punishment for a man who treated her like garbage? I honestly think he got exactly what he deserved. Let me know your rating of this revenge in the comments, 1 to 10. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of a story, please smash that like button. It helps us create more drama for you. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you're the first to see our next story. Trust me, the next one is even crazier. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.